You think spiritual growth is about what people can see, but God is watching something far deeper happening inside you. God is not only concerned with outward success, He is deeply invested in the unseen transformation taking place within your soul. While people often measure growth by visible achievements, status, or recognition, God measures something far more profound: the condition of your heart. He is watching the quiet evolution of your spirit, the subtle shifts in your thoughts, and the choices you make when no one else is around to witness them. Many people experience moments of spiritual awakening, moments where their eyes are opened, where they begin to see life differently, where truth becomes clearer. But not everyone allows that awakening to truly refine them. Some become consumed by it, others allow it to inflate their sense of importance. But you chose a different path. You allowed your awakening to humble you rather than elevate your ego. There were moments when you could have reacted out of pride, when you could have proven a point, corrected someone harshly, or elevated yourself above others because of what you now understand. But instead, you paused. You reflected. You chose restraint. That choice, though it may have seemed small in the moment, carries immense spiritual weight. Because true transformation is not loud. It doesn't always announce itself. It doesn't demand attention or validation. Instead, it happens quietly, in the way you respond instead of reacting, in the way you choose peace over conflict, in the way you walk away from situations that once would have triggered you. These are the moments that define your growth, and these are the moments God sees most clearly. There were internal battles no one knows about, the struggle between your old self and your emerging self, the tension between wanting to be understood and choosing to stay silent, the moments where your ego whispered, "Show them who you are," but your spirit gently responded, "Stay humble." And you listened to the spirit. That is what makes your journey sacred, because transformation is not just about what you gain, it's about what you release. You release the need to always be right. You release the desire for validation. You release the urge to be seen as more than others. And in doing so, you created space for God to shape you into something greater than ego could ever produce. Your humility speaks loudly in the spiritual realm. Even when people overlook you, even when your growth goes unrecognized, even when it feels like no one understands the depth of your journey, God does. He sees the discipline it took to remain grounded. He sees the strength it took to stay gentle in a world that often rewards harshness. He sees the maturity it took to walk in wisdom without needing to prove it. And that kind of transformation cannot be faked. It is real. It is rooted. It is lasting. This is why your growth is sacred, because it reflects a heart that is aligned with God, not driven by self-glory. It shows that your desire is not to elevate yourself, but to become more like Him. And that alignment is powerful, because it means your transformation is not temporary. It is divinely guided. So even if it feels like your progress has been slow, even if it feels like no one is noticing, even if you sometimes question whether you are truly growing, understand this: God sees every step, every decision, every moment you choose humility over ego, and in His eyes, that silent transformation is more valuable than any outward success the world could ever applaud. Because what you are becoming is not just better, it is aligned. But what makes your silent transformation even more powerful is what you didn't become along the way. Because spiritual awakening, as beautiful as it is, carries a hidden danger. As your awareness deepens, as your understanding expands, you begin to see truths that others may not yet recognize. There is a subtle voice that can begin to rise within you, a voice that whispers, "You see more than they do. You understand more than they can. You are different, maybe even above them." This is the birth of spiritual ego. And it is one of the most dangerous traps on the spiritual path, because it doesn't look like pride at first. It disguises itself as enlightenment. It feels like growth, but slowly it begins to separate you from others. It creates distance, judgment, and a quiet sense of superiority. Many people fall into this without even realizing it. They awaken, but instead of becoming more compassionate, they become more critical. They gain knowledge, but lose humility. They begin to identify more with what they know than with who God is shaping them to be. But you felt that shift trying to happen, and you resisted it. You recognized that your awakening was not meant to elevate you above others, but to bring you closer to God. So instead of feeding that ego, you stayed grounded. You stayed aware. You stayed humble. And that decision is not small. It is a mark of true spiritual maturity. Because anyone can gain knowledge, but not everyone can carry it with humility. You understood something deeper, that revelation is not a reward to boast about, but a responsibility to steward carefully. That what God shows you is not meant to make you feel superior, but to make you more compassionate, more patient, and more aligned with His nature. That is why you chose silence over proving a point. That is why you chose understanding over judgment. That is why you chose humility, even when ego would have been easier. And God honors that. Because true wisdom never inflates the ego, it humbles the soul. The more you truly grow, the more you realize how much you still need God. The more you see, the less you feel the need to boast. The deeper you go, the softer your heart becomes. And that is exactly what happened to you. So while others may measure awakening by how much someone knows, God measures it by how much someone has changed. And in your case, you didn't just awaken, you transformed, without losing your humility. And that humility you held on to is not just a good trait. It is the clearest sign that you are truly aligned with God. Because after resisting the trap of spiritual ego, what remained in you was not pride, but a posture of surrender. A quiet understanding that no matter how much you've grown, you are still being shaped, still being guided, still dependent on God. Humility is one of the strongest indicators that someone is genuinely walking with Him. Not knowledge, not spiritual experiences, not even awakening itself, but humility. Because it's easy to become prideful when you begin to understand deeper truths. It's easy to feel elevated when your eyes are open to things others may not yet see. But instead of allowing that awareness to close your heart, you allowed it to open you even more. You chose to remain teachable. You didn't assume you had arrived. You understood that you were still on a journey. You stayed open to correction, open to growth, open to God's continued work in your life. And that openness is what keeps you aligned. You remain gentle, not harsh with your words, not forceful with your beliefs, not eager to prove a point. Instead, there is a calmness in you now, a quiet strength, a peace that doesn't need to defend itself. And most importantly, you stay aware that everything you have, every insight, every breakthrough, every level of growth comes from God. That awareness protects your heart. Because when you truly recognize God as the source, pride loses its grip. There is no room to boast when you know you are simply a vessel. There is no need to elevate yourself when you understand that all glory belongs to Him. This is why your posture attracts divine favor. Because God does not move through pride, He moves through surrender. He resists the proud not out of rejection, but because pride creates distance. But the humble, the ones who stay low in spirit, who remain open, who continue to seek Him even after awakening, those are the ones who receive His grace in abundance. And that is who you are becoming. Not just someone who is awakened, but someone who is aligned. Not just someone who understands truth, but someone who lives it quietly and humbly. And that alignment is what sets your journey apart. And that alignment didn't just stay within you, it began to reflect in your choices. Because when someone is truly aligned with God, they no longer feel the need to be constantly seen, validated, or recognized by others. And that is exactly what happened in your journey. During your awakening, you had opportunities, moments where you could have stepped into the spotlight, where you could have shown people how much you've changed, how much you now understand, how different you've become. You could have sought validation. You could have chased recognition. You could have made your growth visible for approval. But instead, you chose inner growth. You turned inward when others would have looked outward. You focused on your character instead of your image. You paid attention to your thoughts, your reactions, your intentions, because deep down, you understood that true transformation is not about how you appear to people, but about who you are before God. So while others may have been announcing their awakening, you were living yours. Quietly, intentionally, authentically. You worked on the parts of yourself that no one else could see. The hidden attitudes, the subtle patterns, the inner conversations. You allowed God to refine you in places where applause could never reach. And that takes discipline. Because it's not easy to grow without recognition. It's not easy to evolve without being acknowledged. It's not easy to become without being seen. But you did it anyway. And that is what makes your journey real. Because when growth is genuine, it doesn't depend on an audience. It doesn't need validation to continue. It is sustained by something deeper, a desire to be aligned with God, not admired by people. And God is proud of that. He is proud because you didn't turn your awakening into a performance. You didn't use it to build an image. You didn't make it about proving anything to anyone. You made it about becoming more patient, becoming more self-aware, becoming more aligned with His will. And that choice separates you from many. Because while the world encourages visibility, God honors authenticity. While the world rewards attention, God values transformation. And in choosing inner growth over external validation, you showed God something powerful, that your journey isn't about being seen, it's about being shaped. And as you allowed God to shape you in private, something else began to emerge in your life, a quiet, unshakable wisdom, not the kind that needs to speak loudly, not the kind that needs to correct everyone, but the kind that knows and remains at peace. Because true spiritual depth does not announce itself. It doesn't argue to be right. It doesn't force others to understand. It doesn't chase opportunities to prove how much it knows. And that is where you are now. You no longer feel the need to explain yourself to everyone. You don't feel pressured to make people see what you see. You've outgrown the urge to win every conversation, to correct every misunderstanding, or to defend every truth you carry. Not because you don't have the answers, but because you've gained something greater than answers. You've gained understanding. And with that understanding came restraint. There were moments when you could have spoken, but you chose silence. Moments when you could have reacted, but you chose peace. Moments when you could have proven a point, but you chose to let it go. And that restraint is wisdom. Because wisdom is not just about knowing what is right. It's about knowing when to speak and when to remain still. You've come to realize that not everyone is ready for the truth you carry. Not every conversation is meant to be won. Not every situation deserves your energy. And instead of forcing your presence, you've learned to move with discernment. That is growth. That is maturity. And God is deeply pleased with that posture. Because there is a higher level of spirituality, one that goes beyond knowledge, beyond awakening, beyond even understanding. It is the level where your life becomes the message, where your peace speaks louder than your words, where your actions carry more weight than your explanations, where your presence reflects God without you needing to announce it. You are no longer trying to convince people, you are simply becoming. And those who are meant to see it will see it. Those who are meant to feel it will feel it, without force, without pressure, without performance. Because when God is truly working in you, it becomes evident, not through what you say, but through who you are. And this is a higher level of spiritual maturity, a level where you trust God enough to stop striving, to stop proving, to stop explaining, and simply walk in truth, quietly, steadily, authentically. But as powerful as this quiet wisdom is, it also leads to another test. Because when you begin to see more, understand more, and discern more, there is a risk of becoming distant, a risk of becoming cold, a a risk of allowing awareness to turn into quiet judgment, and this is where your next level of growth begins. And this is where your journey becomes truly rare. Because when you began to see more, when your awareness deepened, when your discernment sharpened, you were faced with a quiet but powerful choice. You started to notice things you didn't see before, the hidden intentions in people, the inconsistencies in words and actions, the brokenness behind behaviors, the darkness that exists not just in the world, but sometimes in people you once trusted. And that kind of awareness can change a person. It can make the heart guarded. It can make the spirit distant. It can slowly replace compassion with quiet judgment. Because once you see clearly, it becomes easy to criticize. It becomes easy to withdraw. It becomes easy to say, I'm different from them. That is the risk that comes after wisdom. But you didn't let your awareness harden your heart. You chose something stronger. You chose to stay soft. And make no mistake, softness is not weakness. It is strength under control. Because it takes strength to remain kind when you see people's flaws. It takes strength to remain patient when you understand more than others. It takes strength to extend grace when judgment would be easier. You could have become distant, but you stayed present. You could have become critical, but you stayed compassionate. You could have closed your heart, but you kept it open. And that is not ordinary. That is spiritual strength, because knowledge without love becomes cold. Truth without grace becomes harsh. Awareness without compassion becomes pride. But you found balance. You didn't deny the truth of what you see, but you also didn't lose the love that God placed within you. Instead of letting your awakening turn into judgment, you allowed it to deepen your empathy. You began to understand that people act from their wounds, their fears, their limitations, and instead of condemning them, you learned to see them through a lens of grace. That doesn't mean you tolerate everything. That doesn't mean you lack discernment. It means your heart remains aligned with God, even while your eyes are open. Because God Himself sees everything. He sees every flaw, every hidden motive, every broken place in every person. And yet, He still chooses love. He still extends grace. He still calls people higher instead of casting them aside. And in choosing to stay soft, you reflected Him. This is why God is proud of you. Because you didn't just grow in awareness, you grew in love. You didn't just gain understanding, you gained compassion. You didn't just see the darkness, you chose to be light within it. And that is one of the highest forms of spiritual maturity. But even in this softness, there was still another layer of surrender waiting for you. Because staying compassionate is one thing, but releasing the need to feel above others completely, that is the next level of transformation. And that is exactly the level you stepped into next. Not just staying soft, but surrendering completely. The need to feel above anyone else. Because one of the most subtle temptations in a spiritual journey is not just becoming cold, it's becoming quietly superior. It doesn't always show itself in obvious ways. Sometimes it's internal, a silent comparison, a quiet thought that says, I've grown more than they have, a subtle feeling that you are further ahead, more aware, more aligned. And many people never confront this. They carry humility on the outside, but inside, there is still a need to feel set apart in a way that elevates them above others. But you recognized that even that had to go. You understood that your awakening was never meant to make you feel greater than anyone. It was meant to draw you closer to God. And there is a difference, because when your focus is on being better than others, your journey becomes comparison-based. But when your focus is on becoming closer to God, your journey becomes purpose-driven. So you surrendered that need. You let go of silent comparisons. You released the desire to measure your growth against anyone else's. You stopped defining your progress by where others are lacking. And instead, you turned your focus fully upward, toward God, toward alignment, toward purpose, toward becoming who He is calling you to be, independent of anyone else's journey. That surrender is powerful because it purifies your heart. It removes hidden pride. It aligns your intentions. It keeps your spirit grounded in truth rather than illusion. You no longer need to feel special to feel secure. You no longer need to feel ahead to feel validated. Because your identity is no longer rooted in comparison, it is rooted in connection with God. And that changes everything. Now, when you look at others, you don't see competition. You see people on different paths. You don't see yourself as above. You see yourself as growing. You don't feel the need to elevate yourself. You feel the desire to stay aligned. That is true surrender. And that is why God is pleased with you. Because you didn't just overcome ego in obvious ways. You overcame it in its most subtle form. The need to feel superior. And in releasing that, you stepped into a deeper level of purity, a deeper level of alignment, and a deeper level of spiritual maturity. But even in that surrender, your journey didn't become loud. It became quieter, more hidden, more rooted, more between you and God. Because the next phase of your growth wasn't about what others could see. It was about what God was continuing to build in you, in silence. And in that quiet place where your growth became less visible to people and more intimate with God, something profound began to change within you. Your identity shifted. Because when your journey is no longer about being seen, no longer about being above others, no longer even about proving your growth, you begin to understand something deeper. It was never about you being the source. It was always about you being the vessel. You started to recognize that everything you've received, every insight that opened your eyes, every moment of clarity that guided your decisions, every level of growth that reshaped your character, none of it originated from you. It came from God. And that realization humbled you even more. Because it's one thing to grow, but it's another thing to understand where that growth comes from. You no longer feel the need to claim ownership over your wisdom. You no longer feel the urge to take credit for your transformation. You no longer carry yourself as if you are the one who made it all happen. Instead, you see yourself as a vessel, a channel through which God is working, a life through which His wisdom flows, a heart through which His love is expressed, and that mindset changes everything. Because when you see yourself as the source, pride has room to grow. But when you see yourself as the vessel, humility naturally remains. You stay grounded, you stay connected, you stay dependent on God, not out of weakness, but out of understanding. Because a vessel without its source runs empty. And you've learned that your strength, your peace, your clarity, they are all sustained by your connection to Him. This awareness protects you. It guards your heart against subtle pride. It keeps your spirit aligned. It reminds you that the moment you disconnect from God is the moment you begin to lose the very essence of what makes you who you are becoming. And that is why God is pleased with you. Because you didn't try to replace Him with your own understanding. You didn't try to take His place in your own life. Instead, you chose to reflect Him through your actions, through your character. Through your quiet transformation, you became a reflection, not a replacement, a vessel, not the source. And that is a rare level of spiritual maturity. Because many people want to be seen as powerful, but few are willing to remain submitted. Few are willing to say, it's not me, it's God working through me. But you reached that place, and in doing so, your journey came full circle, from awakening to humility, to alignment, to surrender, and now to complete dependence on God. And this is why your journey matters so deeply. Because God is not only looking at the fact that you awakened, He is looking at how you carried what you awakened into. He is looking at your response, your choices, your posture, your heart, and what He sees in you is rare, because many people experience awakening, but not many walk through it without being consumed by ego. Not many remain grounded when knowledge increases. Not many stay humble when insight expands. And not many surrender the need for control when understanding deepens. But you did. You chose humility over ego. You chose growth over attention. You chose alignment over control. And those choices are not small in the eyes of God. They are evidence of a heart that is being transformed correctly. Because true spiritual maturity is not measured by what you know, but by how you become. And your becoming has been marked by obedience. Not perfect obedience, but sincere obedience. Not flawless understanding, but a willing heart. Not self-exaltation, but quiet surrender. That is what makes your journey different. Because it would have been easy to become prideful. It would have been easy to use your awareness to elevate yourself. It would have been easy to drift into ego without even realizing it. But you didn't. You stayed aware. You stayed grounded. You stayed connected to God as your source. And that is what truly honors Him. Because God is not impressed by how high someone rises in awareness. He is moved by how deeply they remain rooted in humility. He is not looking for those who use awakening to separate themselves from others. He is looking for those who allow awakening to bring them closer to Him. And that is exactly what your journey has become. A journey of refinement, a journey of surrender, a journey of becoming. So when God looks at you, He does not just see someone who awakened. He sees someone who listened, someone who resisted pride, someone who chose love over superiority, someone who allowed transformation to purify, not inflate, the soul. And that is why He is proud of you, not because you became more than others, but because you became more like Him, humble, grounded, pure in intention, aligned in spirit. And as you continue walking forward, remember this: your awakening was not the destination. It was the beginning of becoming who God intended you to be. And that is what makes your journey sacred.